Howdy, everybody. Welcome. Thank you all for being here again. Welcome to Office Hours. Today's February 25th. I had to check my watch. I can't see the top right of my screen. I'm Keith McCammon, joined as always by esteemed Red Canary CISO Dave Farrow, and new victim this week, Brian Donohue, who's been prepping for this since the last Office Hours. He's had lots of advance notice. He decided to join us. Brian's responsible for the vast majority of like our public research, leads our threat detection report, and in general, like just has a ton of kind of experience and insights and some occasionally provocative questions related to these topics. So we're gonna mix things up a little bit today. So by way of agenda, we're going to talk through Saffron Starling in particular, which is like one of the threats that kind of broke into our monthly top 10 for the first time, despite having been around for a while. And we're going to use, I think, the entire session today talking through this, both breaking down like what this thing is, what it looks like, but also want to spend a good bit of time at the end focusing on like how we can like harden against it, detect what's left, and just talk through some of these vectors. So that's going to be the flow today. As always, this will be recorded, and old sessions, I think we're a couple weeks behind getting those posted. The entire Red Canary team was, if you recall, or here last week, we were on our annual offsite. So we're a week behind on doing real work, but we're getting caught up. So all these past episodes will be up on YouTube here shortly.
Yeah, I'd like to throw in here that as we were preparing for this, one of the interesting parts of the conversation that I hope we cover in here is how we classify these things, because we did pull Saffron Starling out as a specific cluster of activity, and that whole process and how we think about that was a little bit new to me, and I thought it was really interesting. So hopefully we touch on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll have a great opportunity to do that. So just to kind of calibrate everyone so you understand where we are. So if you recall, last week, we gave a little bit of a preview to the top 10, like our intelligence insights that were just released publicly a few days ago. We covered infrared IBIS in a past session. And today we're going to talk through Saffron Starling, which is not at the top of the list, but is, again, like we wanted to cover this just because it's been around for a long time. And so it's like one of these lingering threats that has always been a problem or has been a problem for a couple of years. But it is just now starting to rank, and maybe we'll talk through a little bit of why that is today. So just to give a brief overview. So like Saffron Starling's a dropper or a downloader. And so like its job is to be effectively like the earliest stage of an attack. So and in this case, you can kind of see here just the overall flow. We'll dig into this a lot more. But this thing's delivered generally via phishing lore, and then Saffron Starling, like this activity cluster. And it's like what Dave was referring to is like this cluster, it refers to the delivery mechanism and then some of these early stage techniques. And you can see here, we've got some examples of like specific malware families. Oh, sorry about my cursor. So specific malware families that are getting delivered, but Dave asked a question yesterday, and maybe we can start by talking through that just very briefly here. But like he's like, hey, if we see a new malware family being delivered on the tail end of this thing, does that mean that Saffron Starling changes? And so like, Brian, I don't know if you want to take a few seconds and just explain kind of how we approach that and think about it.
Typically, like a lot of these clusters, we're talking about like the very specific delivery mechanism. So it might change like how we think about that cluster of activity, but the cluster itself may like deliver multiple threats, right? In this case, Danabot, Darkgate, and Matambicus. I never know how to pronounce these stupid names, but like
I've avoided saying that out loud.
Yeah, I know. I knew it was going to come down to me. So like, just to give you an idea of like the severity or the scope of this thing, like Danabot is a modular Trojan. It can do a lot of things, including delivering other threats. So it's like it can log keystrokes. It can do a level of remote access. It can take screenshots, and then again, it also will deliver other threats. And then Darkgate is another downloader. So it is kind of this strange ecosystem where it's like you've got one dropper loader delivering other dropper loaders, and like you chain enough of those together, and eventually you get to the bad thing. And in the case of Darkgate, in particular, that bad thing has been known to be Cobalt Strike leading into ransomware in the past. And then this other threat, Matambicus, maybe. Similar, also a dropper, which confusingly it can also deliver Danabot, but also Cobalt Strike and leading to sort of those more severe things as well.
So,
Yeah,
so from that, Brian, I would assume then that Saffron Starling has a relatively limited set of primitives that it can actually deliver. Right? It's basically like a bootloader for other stuff. Is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to go through most of what it does here in these next few slides. And I would say it is a pretty limited set of things that it does to just sort of get a payload onto a machine. But like one of the really, really important reasons that we track at this really granular level is because like if you can stop it at this stage, then you don't have to worry about whatever Danabot, Darkgate, or Matambicus is going to do on the back end.
Right.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's do that. So with that, let's move right into it. Um, and this might be a good time to throw up the, actually, no, we'll hang tight. We'll wait for the great reveal on poll results till later. I was kind of, I jumped the gun. I'm very, very curious. This has been itching at me. So how this thing starts by way of primitives, right? So like the earliest signal, and we always try to, figure out, we don't always see the initial entry vector into an organization, right? So it's possible that someone exploits a Fortinet device and like that thing may not have great visibility or great telemetry coming out of it. So like we may see later stage activity, but with this threat in particular, one of the hallmarks of it is that it's delivered via spear phishing. And so, uh, this is pretty straightforward, so we'll move through it, but wanted to share this just so folks get a really concrete sense of the specific naming convention that's used. One thing that I think we'll watch out for is like, Brian, I think you mentioned this yesterday when you were kind of running through this with the Intel team, but like it's tax season, right? So this example, which was taken from some previous observables in our environment, used our beloved test user Joe Dirt, right? But like there's a username, but as is always the case, like expect that you can replace a username with things like invoice or like any number of kind of like thematic or like, I guess, like time relevant examples. Like that's very, very common. So,
Are we only seeing this delivered through email right now?
I believe
yep,
so,
I
yes.
believe so. Yep. Yep. And then this is like inside of that zip file, which I affectionately think of as like a nesting doll for malware and other bad things. So inside of those zip files, you're gonna have one of two things, right? And so like that, so once you're past that initial access, like delivery via spear phishing, you're going to see one of these two things happen. And so like that zip file is either going to contain a VB script file or a JavaScript file. And we'll walk through in a minute some of the more specific examples of like where and how we see these. And in particular, like which malware families have kind of had an affinity for one or the other. But really high level, like this is pretty straightforward. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add or anything to tack on here, but I think this is like by way of how bad things happen. Like this may be one of the oldest and saddest of all of them, right? This is like a pretty predictable pattern.
Yeah, like zip file containing some sort of script that does bad thing is like, a very high percentage of threats that we're seeing and that we list in our top 10 monthly do something at least similar to that.
Yeah. So when you say this is like the sad thing, like I came from an email security vendor many years ago. And so we've been looking at this type of attack for years. And the fact that we're still playing whack-a-mole with the different ways that you can deliver bad stuff through zip files. It just makes you sad, right? There are so many different ways, you can hide things in these files that it just feels like a never-ending cat and mouse game.
Yeah, you know, it's like I would love to bookmark that too for a discussion and maybe and even for those of you, I think hopefully everyone took the poll on the way in and we'll go through those results a little bit later. But in general, I think super interesting to understand like maybe at the level below the poll, if anybody would like to share, it's like what are the really compelling reasons for needing to continue to allow that? Because I think that's an assertion we'd love to challenge when we kind of get into discussion here. Um, and so again, thinking through, like you referred to it as primitives, right? Like what are the kind of defining characteristics that lead our team to say, hey, this is an instance of Saffron Starling. And that starts with being delivered via spear phishing, probably adhering to that naming convention. Then we see inside of that like inside of that zip archive that's delivered, either that VB script or JavaScript. And then this is really the last hallmark of Saffron Starling, which is that like that script goes and takes a copy of the curl executable. So curl is just a standalone utility that's meant to go fetch other stuff off the network, right, or off the internet, and executes it. And so, and again, really common pattern. And now we're kind of into like, Brian, I know like this is like the forever theme, which is like calling them just LOL things at this point because there's so many different like subdivisions, but like effectively all of these will pivot into like abusing a thing that you can't take away, right?
I, I'm actually baffled by this because I'm like, I was looking at various detections associated with this yesterday, and like the way they've renamed this executable is inherently sketchy. Like I don't understand what renaming it to this random sequence of letters buys them. Like, why not just leave it named curl? Or like rename it. I get it if they renamed it to like Notepad or Chrome, right? Or something that like would seem normal, but like these executables are just wacky. Like there's no executable with that name. There shouldn't be, at least.
I got a theory for you. I thought about this. So, one of the, in particular, just looking back through like years of our reporting, but also everyone else's, it's like you have W script and you have PowerShell and you have these like, particularly on Windows, you have this relatively finite set of things that people will use to go out and fetch something. But I'd say there's a ton of scrutiny on like PowerShell and W script. So like you see those things going and talking to the internet, you've got a huge problem. Curl is designed to go to the internet for a wide variety of reasons, but like it's just like that's its only purpose. And so I do wonder if like PowerShell and WScript have enough eyes on them that like those maybe aren't ideal anymore. There's just it's getting easier to build detections around that. Um, curl people know about and maybe build detections around. But now if you just call curl something else, which is like not as easy to do with a PowerShell or a W script, it's like a curl is like the functionality you want, but it's highly portable, standalone. There's like no dependencies. And so I don't know. I thought about that because I was like, why go through this trouble if you can just run curl? But I do wonder if like once you get past those big scripting harnesses like PowerShell and WScript, like this is another thing that gives you the functionality, but there aren't as many eyes on it.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, and we'll get into this in a second, like if your detection logic is just looking for an executable that's like ostensibly its file name is curl.exe, then you can name it whatever you want and it's going to slip through.
Yep.
Yeah, and while that random name looks totally sketchy to a human seeing it, and that's going to set off alarm bells on a human, do we actually have patterns that say fire on random process names? Like, I'm not even sure how you would write a pattern for something like that. It's easy for us to detect, but not necessarily for a computer.
So sort of, yeah. We have like some regex based, usually for like file names, I think, but like what we have some regex things that if there's a pattern there, you can find it. But like in a second, we'll go through what is the better way to do this, although it is also the harder way to do it.
Yep. Yeah, and actually, so I want and maybe we'll skim over these or kind of just start to dig in here a little bit, but I wanted to provide a couple of concrete examples. And so, recalling here, we just like the previous example was like really straightforward. That's just effectively your defense evasion technique, right? So take curl, copy it, and run it. And now here you can see in a little bit more detail exactly what's happening. This one I plucked out from the examples like in our internal intel holdings, mainly because I noticed the PDF thing in there. This is like a little bit more of like a meaty command line. And so I started looking at that, wondering like, hey, is that another payload? What else is going on? And at least in a couple like the cases that we had, I found it interesting that it appears to just be the thing that pops up so that the user believes they got something of a
Yes.
value, right? It's just like so the user doesn't run this thing and then wonder like why did nothing happen? And so they give them a PDF, but it doesn't always happen that way. So and in this case also the like that MSI you can see has like this correlation for Manabakis. So that was like an interesting like observation. And I'll jump ahead to the next one too, just to keep us moving. But
Before you move,
mentioned,
do you know what that MSI required user interaction behind it?
that's a good question, Brian. Do you know anything? Do you know if that's a thing that we run into?
I don't. I'd have to ask somebody.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good question.
We
And I
wrote
know you.
about we've written about MSI pretty extensively, but I'd have to go back and read up about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the nature of that exactly was. And just to provide a final example here before we really dig into kind of like overall defensive approaches. So this is a case where those auto IT scripts tend to have a like. Actually, I think it is a provided by Darkgate is like the auto IT script. So
But
like,
to circle back to what Dave just asks, I don't think it matters because we see things that require user interaction and it works all the time. Like particularly for Mac OS, like for almost any thread on Mac OS, you have to go through like the install thing, and the malware people just write like follow these instructions, and people just do it. So like whether it's one click or two clicks or no clicks, like it works regardless.
Fair enough.
that'll be a fun topic for a future office hours, which is the phenomenon that people are just getting called and saying, go open this, type this in and push enter, and they're doing it. So there's like, yeah, there's levels to it, so to speak, but none of them are
So
good.
you're saying we don't even, it doesn't look like adversaries are even worrying about hiding the user interaction because the success rate is high enough that they don't need to work that hard.
Yeah, I mean, what Keith was just alluding to, like this whole paste and click thing we've been seeing, people are literally taking these PowerShell commands and following instructions to execute them through the Windows run dialog box. And like, if you can get someone to do that, like you get them to do anything.
This
Fair
isn't
enough.
So this is a high level overview, but again, just to kind of count like just the end to end, and I'd say this is like back to your question, Dave, like what defines this threat for us? It is like that initial delivery vector, the early stage activity, defense evasion, and then like the payloads themselves, I would say are like the like malleable part of this, right? You can absolutely, when we first started tracking Saffron Starling, I believe we only saw one or maybe two of these malware families. And over time, we've continued to see additional ones get tacked on. Um, so now without further ado, so like if Adam, could you hit us with poll results, please? All right, man, these polls are too evenly split. We're gonna have to come up with more controversial questions.
So the central question here is like, should organizations block the reception of zip archive files via email by default? And I don't know if the answer to that should be yes. Like, I think that you should do something to not allow regular users to execute VB script and JavaScript like on the back end of that zip, because really most 99.9% of users have no reason to be executing those. Whereas zips, like some people use zip files to like deliver large files that can't go out over email. I don't know how common it is anymore with like now with all the cloud storage options that are available to us, but like I still occasionally encounter a zip file, maybe not over email though.
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
I've been at this.
I was going to say, I'm curious, like the chat kind of popped off and I saw like Chris's comment that they strip and quarantine them, which by the way is like, that's my campaign right now. Chris
Right.
Brown was party to my campaign on LinkedIn yesterday. Yep. But like, this is like, I think it's a fascinating, like I went through my email for the last 2 years to see how often I've gotten like a zip archive delivered to me as an attachment, and it's happened one time in 2 years.
Yeah,
What was in it?
but I would argue, Keith, that
And it's
in
probably
your
malware.
role, I would argue in your role that makes sense. What I
Yeah.
want to know is, let's talk to the finance department or the accounting department or the procurement department. Right? I've been around long enough to know that behind every one of these seeming bad habits is some really legitimate business reason that just makes you sad and thinks this is why we can't have nice things. And the aha moment that I had sort of as we were preparing for this is that, like, remember last week we talked about LLMs as being data that's in control of God knows who, and someone can hand you this thing, and someone's been busy trying to weaponize this. Email is the same thing. It's one of the places in our digital lives where any random stranger can hand us any random thing, right? And so the idea of receiving zip files, like I can see there being legitimate reason for zip files to be part of a business's life, but I don't see why we should accept zip files from just anybody.
Yeah, just
Right?
anybody and to just anybody, right? And I think that really is the assertion is like block these by default. And if you have pockets of people who need to do this, that's
Right?
okay. And I think that's kind of been some of the, like got another like direct message over here is like along the same lines, right? It's like, we allow this to groups of people who have a business need for it. And Brian, to your point, like I think, yeah, ideally you could say, yeah, you can get a zip file as long as it doesn't have one of these bad things in it. But I think this is like, the trillion-dollar email security industry that 20 years later still can't keep this thing from landing in someone's inbox and detonating, right? And it's not entirely their fault. It's just that, like zips can have more zips in them, and then they can have other things. And like literally, the nesting doll like analogy is the best thing I can come up with. Like it's extremely difficult to do that with any confidence because
Right?
like it's such a moving target on the inside. So
Right. Yeah, there are a bunch of
um,
good comments over here. Ed talks about password protect. If it's not password protected, the gateway can unzip and inspect it.
yeah.
Like we immediately saw folks putting password protection on as a way to bypass that, and that made me sad when I was in the email business. Um, I think Jennifer's comment that this is just how we always do it is probably the most compelling reason that we still support this in a lot of organizations is that changing culture to do something like Steve is saying, to upload things through an upload portal, changing that culture is extremely difficult. And I think it takes a lot of peopling effort and business buy-in to change those kind of patterns if you're going to stop this. But I think one way that we can uh, help maybe drive that cultural change is pointing out that like we are handling dangerous inputs from random users, and we can cut down our attack surface dramatically by going to more of an upload portal type of solution. I'm just curious how many people have done it successfully.
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple over there. That was actually my response yesterday when we were prepping for this. Like, I get zip things sent to me, not all the time, but often enough, just via a much safer mechanism. And so, and I'll move on. But like to me, it's the last thing we'll kind of say about this is like um, it's it's the way we've always done it, right? And I think Jennifer, man, that comment really hits home. Like, so that's going to be a lot of people's argument to us as security folks, which is like, I don't know, this is how we've always done it. We should keep doing it. And my argument back to them is like 10, 15 years later, like people are still getting ransomware. And 10, 15 years from now, if we don't change some of those fundamental behaviors, like patching stuff, dealing more aggressively with email, like we can keep getting ransomware. So,
And I'm going to throw out another spicy solution here that I'm just going to throw this question out. Nobody's prepared for this, so if it goes sideways, blame me. But I think encrypting email was supposed to be the solution to all this, and I have yet to see an email encryption solution that anybody was willing to use. I'm curious if anybody is tackling the problem this way.
I want to add to that question. Why is this such a hard problem?
Yeah, right.
Like,
Uh,
Signal is like someone just came along, like Moxie and those guys just came along and invented the most secure way to communicate ever conceived. And we've had email for I don't even know how long, 4 decades. It's
I,
still
I'm
just problematic.
I'm going to venture a guess that the answer boils down to PKI is hard.
yeah, I say anybody managing their own key material is, I think we tried really hard for a really long time, and that ended up being like that the friction's too high, right?
Right.
All right, so got two more things to get through. We got about 3 more minutes to do it, and so Brian, you want to walk us through this one? So like this was this like the brainchild of a couple of the folks on like our intel and threat hunting team, in the sense that like this is one of their go-to recommendations to customers. And so like I'll let you kind of walk through like what the thinking is here and what this is.
Yeah, so I alluded to it earlier when I was saying maybe don't block zip files, but definitely do this, which is like just change the default program that opens problematic files. So things like VB scripts, JScript, JavaScript, there's a whole variety of things you could apply to this, and make it so that like if anyone double clicks one of these files, instead of opening it in a like W script or C script or whatever it would default open and execute in, open it in Notepad, right? So the benefit here is like if I'm a person who actually needs to be dealing with these types of files, I will know how to run them where they are supposed to run. And if I'm a regular user, they'll just open in Notepad and I won't have any idea what I'm looking at, and I'll move on, right? So, and you can configure this via group policy objects. And I wish I had thought to provide this resource ahead of time, because someone out there read the blog they just shared with you and like gave more detailed instructions about how you can do this like across a really large enterprise. Um, but basically, like you just go into the group policy management editor, and you just update the default open program for whatever file types you want to open in Notepad rather than like a scripting interpreter or WScript or whatever.
Oh, there, I was going to say, Adam just posted Chuck's gist there, which has, I think, some of these instructions, but also like a little bit more detail. I don't know if that's what you had in mind, Brian, but he also has a really extensive list of the extensions that we've seen leading to like ransomware payloads in particular.
No, someone from outside of Red Canary wrote like a really detailed write-up on how to kind of do it like in a really, really enterprise ready way. But I can't remember who it was. So sorry for that.
Are
We've
we
got
aware
the
of,
free, we have the free no warranty version available for you here in the chat. So
do we know if there's something similar like that for Mac that we can share with folks?
I know that there is, and we are not prepared to share it.
Ah, we should bring that back sometime
The
because
best answer I have to your question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is cool. Like, we should follow up with that, or maybe update that blog post and reference it. Last thing I want to make sure we had time to get to. So, um, email, all you have to do is block zip files for your whole organization. How hard could it be? And then for on the Windows side, at least, like GPO, all you have to do is create 50 of those and make sure they don't break anything. How hard could it be? But this I want to call out because now that we're into kind of that concept of like taking existing binaries, like either relocating them and or just living on the land as they are. But like a lot of the time we do see things like, um, you know, existing system DLLs delivered like separately or kind of out of band because there's restrictions on how you can interact with them. It's like, this is a tough, pretty thorny problem. So like, and I think Brian, you kind of like added these as just a couple of examples and just like pseudocode. So if you don't mind just walking through this, we got about 2-minute warning here, but
Yeah, so I think they shared the broader resource on this, but a few years ago we did this research like following on the back of some stuff that our detection engineering team did, where they basically found like went out and analyzed all of the system 32 binaries and then also just some other really like common binaries, and basically created a system for like associating those binaries with their internal metadata, right? So I can change curl.exe, the file name, you can change that and that doesn't matter, but you can't really change the internal metadata. If you change that stuff, you're just delivering a different thing altogether.
in
So
particular, you've broken code signing, right? Which we'll kind of put up. That's definitely like a user interaction hurdle. Like they may still get past it, but like that's a speed bump that they're trying to avoid, right?
yeah, so basically all we do is like if we see a process name that is curl.exe and it doesn't have a corresponding, like it doesn't have that corresponding metadata with it. And in this case, I don't know exactly what it would be. It probably like its internal name is probably curl or something like that. Um,
Yep.
so like if you can find a way of finding those mismatches, that's going to be a really, really easy way to find this sort of activity. And it works in reverse too, right? If the internal name is curl and the file name is not curl, like that's pretty suspicious in most cases. And
Yep.
then the other thing down here at the bottom is just like in general stuff launching from app data. In particular, like WScript, like executing JS files or WScript executing VBS files from a zip file in the app data. Like a ton of the detection logic that we've shared in like the threat detection report and about specific threats, well beyond just the one we're talking about today, leverages like some kind of flavor of this. And it's relatively straightforward to detect, just like looking for the process that's executing, and then along with like the file type and the, you know, whatever the file name property is. In this case, we're talking about app data.
Yeah, like the breadth here is the hard part, right? There are literally like 100 or probably well more than that of these. And I said we had a lot to get through. We got through a lot. We are right at time. So really appreciate everyone, all your input. Love all the questions and discussion in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us. Look for the like these in past weeks on YouTube, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Brian, Dave, thank you both so much.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Cheers, everybody.